Welcome in, everyone. Let's just jump right into it. Today's explainer takes us into one of the most harrowing, unbelievable, and ultimately inspiring true stories of human survival literally ever recorded. We're looking at the real events of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. This is the disaster that struck the remote Andes back in October 1972, which you might know as the incredible true story that inspired director J.A. Bayona's Oscar-nominated film Society of the Snow. We're going to break down exactly what happened, step by step, to really grasp the reality of this event.
Because it really all comes down to this one, almost unfathomable question. How on earth do 16 people survive for 72 days in the frozen Andes with absolutely no food and zero winter gear? I mean, we are talking about ordinary people thrust into an environment that is actively trying to kill them every single second. How they made it out is a masterclass in resilience, ingenuity, and honestly, above all, human connection.
Part 1. The Flight 571 crash.
To really understand the miracle here, we have to start with the tragedy. 45. That's the number of passengers and crew who boarded this fateful flight from Montevideo, Uruguay, heading over to Santiago, Chile. And the manifest? It was just full of youth and life. It carried the old Christians Club rugby team, along with their friends, their family members, all just looking forward to a fun match across the border.
But out of those 45 vibrant lives that took to the sky that day, ultimately only 16 of those young men would actually be rescued.
And between the crash and that rescue lies this agonizing number, 72. For 72 days, these survivors were stranded in the freezing, unforgiving, and incredibly remote high-altitude mountains of the Andes. Just put that into perspective for a second. Imagine spending over 2 months completely isolated from the world in sub-zero temperatures.
So how did they even end up there? Well, on October 13, 1972, they were flying in a Fairchild Hiller FH-227D aircraft. Pilots actually nicknamed this specific model the lead sled because, frankly, they considered it woefully underpowered. On top of that, the plane was flying through these dense clouds, completely obscuring the towering peaks of the Andes right below them. The pilot, who, get this, had flown this exact route 29 times, was training his co-pilot who was currently at the controls. A really critical pilot error in navigation caused the plane to start its descent way too early, and that led to a direct collision with the mountain.
Part 2. Surviving the frozen Andes.
That sudden, violent impact left the survivors trapped in an alien world, waking up to a brutal, somber reality. The visual landscape around them was stark, high contrast, and just entirely barren. Survivor Nada Parado brilliantly and chillingly noted that there was nothing here to eat but aluminum, plastic, ice, and rock. And you guys, this wasn't just a metaphor. Their caloric needs at that crazy high altitude were astronomical, and their hunger was so voracious they literally scoured the mangled fuselage for crumbs. They ripped open seat cushions hoping to find edible straw, only to discover useless upholstery foam. They even tried eating strips of leather from luggage. They were starving to death in a frozen wasteland. And then they faced this massive mechanical heartbreak when trying to call for help. They actually found the plane's heavy 53-pound batteries in the severed tail section and hauled them all the way to the fuselage, hoping to power the radio to send an SOS out to Santiago. But here's the gut punch. The plane's avionics required 115-volt AC power, and the batteries they nearly froze to death trying to retrieve, they only supplied 24-volt DC. Their desperate, totally exhausting plan was completely doomed from the start by simple electrical incompatibility.
Part 3. A Pact of Generosity.
So, with no rescue coming and the radio completely dead, the narrative shifts to the emotional and psychological core of this entire ordeal. It moves away from the horror and really focuses on the human spirit. Faced with literal starvation, the group made what they called the Pact of Generosity. This was a mutual agreement among these starving friends, basically offering up their own bodies as food for the others if they perished. When director J.A. Bayona made his film, he stressed that this story is never focused on the horror of survival cannibalism. Instead, it's focused entirely on extreme generosity and friendship. It was a vehicle for survival, an act of supreme dignity where friends gave everything they had left to ensure their brothers could live.
The crucial point here is understanding their mindset. These were deeply Roman Catholic young men, so overcoming that taboo was a profound spiritual hurdle. To reconcile this, they drew deep parallels to the Eucharist, the conversion of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. They actually turned to John 15:13 from the Bible to justify their actions. No man hath greater love than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. In their eyes, it was the ultimate act of love.
Part 4. The Impossible Mountain Trek.
Fueled by the sacrifice of their friends, waiting for a rescue that simply wasn't coming was no longer an option. It was time for some desperate, proactive action. But before anyone could hike out, they had to somehow survive the freezing nights out on the open mountain. And their ingenuity here is just astounding. They scavenged quilted insulation from the tail, electrical wire, and waterproof fabric from the plane's air conditioning unit. They folded this makeshift quilt in half and meticulously stitched the edges together using the wire. This created this large, insulated sleeping bag designed to trap the combined body heat of 3 men. Without this brilliantly engineered, improvised gear, that final trek would have been a straight-up suicide mission.
Armed with their makeshift sleeping bag, they set off. On day 1, Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin depart westward. By day 3, after literally climbing a nearly vertical ice wall by carving steps with a stick, they reach a massive 14,774-foot ridge. They were hoping to see the green valleys of Chile, but instead, they are stunned to see unending snow-capped peaks in every single direction. Realizing just how long the journey was going to be, Vizintin actually gives his rations to the other 2 and returns to camp. Over the next week, Parrado and Canessa push their dying bodies to the absolute limit. By day 10, after trekking roughly 38 grueling miles, they finally reach a river and spot a Chilean man on horseback and arriero across the raging water.
Over the roar of that river, there was no way they could be heard. So they wrapped a note around a rock and threw it across the water to the man, Sergio Catalan. The note read, "I come from an airplane that crashed in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. I have a wounded friend up there. In the plane, there are still 14 injured people. Please, we can't even walk." That note was the breathtaking climax of this tragedy. It was the physical tether that finally reconnected them to the outside world, launching a massive helicopter rescue that pulled the remaining 14 survivors off the mountain just before Christmas.
Part 5. Rescue and Lasting Legacy.
But the story doesn't just end in 1972. This tragedy transformed into an incredible legacy of resilience and community. As we talked about, the event inspired J.A. Bayona's Oscar-nominated film Society of the Snow. And like the cast highlighted, having this told beautifully in their native Spanish language built a direct bridge to the families and the culture. Back in 1973, the mothers of the victims actually channeled their grief into founding Uruguay's Our Children Library. The families also founded Fundación Vivent to promote organ donation, literally turning a story of bodily sacrifice into a modern life-saving mission. And today, a black obelisk stands silently at the crash site, a solemn monument to those who lived and those who died in the snow. I want to leave you all with this final, provocative thought. If you were stripped of absolutely everything, every comfort, every tool, every piece of food, leaving nothing but aluminum, plastic, ice, and rock, what would you be willing to give to save your friends? The story of Flight 571 isn't just about a plane crash. It's a mirror held up to the absolute limits of human endurance and the staggering depths of our generosity. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this incredible story stays with you as deeply as it has with me.